grew up in Detroit for the elementary school years, and the big transition coming back into Canada, and it was a lot of failure for the first 2 years. So I continued on into high school. One of the things in high school back when I was going to school, there was very few options for us as Native people, and I think for any student taking high school education. So I was streamed into what they call a 4-year science, technology, and trade program. And I really didn't care for that too much. I wanted to get into something that was a little bit more skill-based, but that's where we were told to go. So based on that, I went up to grade 11 and that was it. I just quit. By then I was getting a lot older and decided that there's something out there for life in me, so I found I got a job. I got a family. My other formal education as part of my job working for social services in Wapalan was to go to some college level programs, some night school courses in social welfare, and very ambitious. I completed that in 1 year as opposed to 2. Courses were offered throughout a 2-year period, but I would take two courses one semester, 2 the next semester, and then go back 2 different ones, so I completed in a year for a social welfare certificate. My job in my community as a family service worker, working for Child and Youth Services, was to just pretty well deal with family issues around those involved with CS or those involved with needing more parent education. As a result of that, I felt that there was more of an education that I needed. First Nations Technical Institute was in our community doing, I guess, canvassing for what the communities would need. And one of the things we found was a social service workers program. So that was through Loyalist College. I got the social service workers program in 3 years. And it was actually it was a program that they wanted to start designing as a stepping stone for a lot of people working in social services. So we were sort of guinea pigs. We were piloting a lot of new ideas as far as what a program should contain as far as an Aboriginal stream. And this is what one of the ideas was, to how we can take mainstream programming and find an Indigenous curve to it, so to speak. So we worked on that for 3 years, and out of that was a diploma out of Loyalist College in Belleville. One of the questions of that came out of the group of students was, where do we go with this? What can we do with this education? And the focus was, let's move on to the next level in social services, which was the bachelor's program. So they negotiated a program with Carleton University, and they developed the program for us on an Indigenous stream. One of the things that the professor who was at the School of Social Work really wanted to do is to showcase that as Indigenous people, we can get involved with a program that's at an honors level. So it was an honors level program. So needless to say, our grade point had to be within a certain area, and that's where 12 of us made it through with above 0.4, and we all came out of there with a bachelor's of social work from Carleton University on a 3-year program. And these programs were offered in our First Nations as well as other First Nations in Southwestern Ontario and at Tyendinaga. So that was part of my formal education to this date, as far as looking at getting diplomas and degrees. And because I was so old when I went in as a mature student, so they sort of looked the other way at the grade 12. And even in my workplacing for 26 years, it was not a requirement. And this is the sad thing in most First Nation communities, that some of those qualifications that I had were not a job qualification. So therefore their wage grid, I was at the top of the wage grid when I retired in 26 years, and Well, needless to say, that's another story. Informal education. A lot of my informal education as part of training in a workplace came as a result of going to Delcrest training, going to other trainings hosted by other First Nations. We were party to a regional training group that just took our training dollars and maximized them, and we invited people into our community, and we were invited to other communities to take that informal training. A lot of that was pretty well around case management. A lot of it was communication skills. A big part of it, even back then, was looking at identity, looking at how do we identify as First Nations people, and what does it take to work that into, in my case, social work. How can I identify with other First Nations using different things? Informal education, elders conferences, elder and youth. In my community, there was a lot of cross-training between health services, social services, education. So my collection of certificates mounted up to the point where when we had better beginnings, better futures in our community, we had Nietzsche Institute come in, and for 3 years I've taken 26 weeks of Nietzsche training, so I'm certified and qualified to do drug and alcohol assessment, counseling, and those are things that, because we have a very strong program in drug and alcohol in our community in Wapalan, there was no call for me to ever even utilize those skills. It wasn't until I retired that I started collecting all my certificates and diplomas and degrees that I found that I'm well qualified to do a lot of things. And I find that working in First Nations communities, you had to be quite diverse in your skills, because people's expectations of working in your First Nation community is that you have a lot of the answers. And if you didn't have a lot of the answers, then they would sort of question, well, what good is your education? And so they'd sort of throw it back at you in many different ways. So I found that my volunteerism was a big training as part of my learning. Being a good volunteer and getting those kind of certificates. I was a volunteer firefighter for 35 years. And all along the way, it was recertification every year for those 35 years. So after a while, what you understand is that if there's anything that you need to achieve in education, it's revisiting that. Once you had a certificate or a diploma from Lambton Fire College, then that wasn't the end all. There's other things into other parts of that focus, not just a fireman, but then there's also the debriefing afterwards, the critical stress debriefing that was part of that. So there's a lot of things in education that I've found that there is a place for that skill. If you can just transpose some of the technical part of it into what you can do. And I was able to do that. And to this date, I know that there are people starting to look at health services, and if it's just not nursing, but the whole field of nursing is anything from, you know, doing the direct patient-client work with them to the whole field of nursing. So I think it's looking at the broadest sense of education. Take what you learn from informal life experience and certificate and workshop programs, and then your formal education is always something. Even in light that in my community, it wasn't a job requirement, but for me, looking at the vision ahead as I get older, those skills and those qualifications are something that people are looking for. They're looking for those letters after your name, not just junior in mine. It's the BSW behind that, and that brackets of honors level.